Hello everyone, I'm so glad to see you back on the channel. Today, I'll bring you the next chapter in the emotional love story filled with trials, tears, and hope of the single mother Ly Hoai Ca. In the previous episode, as you all know, little Tony, Hoai Ca's only hope and reason to live, suffered a serious accident and head injury. In that moment, both Hoai Ca and Hùng froze in shock, their hearts nearly stopping when they saw Tony collapse. But thanks to his courage and quick thinking in that life or death situation, Hùng rushed the boy to the hospital, while Hoai Ca trembled in fear, silently praying for a miracle. The doctors did everything they could to save him, and luckily Tony made it through the critical stage. However, because this was a traumatic brain injury, one of the most dangerous types of injuries with unpredictable complications, Tony still had to remain in the hospital for close observation. The hospital room was heavy with tension, filled with the steady beeping of monitors, Tony's faint breaths, and at times, Hoai Ca's helpless sighs. During those days, Hoai Ca hardly slept. Her eyes were darkened with exhaustion, her hair disheveled, her frail hands clutching tightly onto her son's small fingers. She feared that if she let go for even a second, Tony would slip away from her forever. Each time he stirred in his sleep, she would hold her breath, desperately waiting to see if he would wake. As for Hùng, though his leave of absence had already ended, his heart would not allow him to return to duty. He requested a few more days, just to stay by their side. Yet those extra days felt insignificant compared to the looming fear and uncertainty. Hùng was torn apart inside. On one side was the sacred duty and discipline of a police officer, and on the other, his deep love and bond with Hoai Ca and Tony. He knew clearly that if he left now, Hoai Ca would be left alone to shoulder everything: hospital bills, the fear for her son's life, and her own fragile strength. On some nights, Hùng sat silently, watching as Hoai Ca drifted off to sleep beside the hospital bed. Her face, lined with fatigue, still carried traces of strength and resilience. His gaze lingered on her trembling hands holding tightly to Tony, and he wondered, do I have the courage to walk away? If I leave, who will protect them during this darkest time? That haunting question tormented Hùng, making him even more conflicted. He knew that behind this decision was not just his career, it was the fragile future of a small family waiting for him to shield them. So, what will Hùng choose? Will he set aside his personal feelings and return to duty, or will he risk it all to stay with Hoai Ca and Tony, facing the storm together? And ahead of them, what lies in wait, a smooth road, or even greater trials? Stay tuned to witness the next heartfelt moments in today's video. After Tony's fall and the heavy blood loss from his head injury, thanks to the doctor's timely intervention, he made it through the danger and was moved to the recovery ward. The hospital room, stark white and filled with the pungent smell of disinfectant, echoed with the steady beeping of the heart monitor, sounds that both reassured Hoai Ca and tightened her heart with every beat. That night, exhausted after a day of panic and despair, Hoai Ca sat by the bedside, her hand still clutching Tony's tiny fingers, and slowly drifted into a restless sleep. Her gaunt face under the dim yellow light looked heartbreaking, like a mother who had just survived a storm, only to be crushed by the weight of helplessness. Hùng was different. Though his body was worn out, his eyes refused to close. He sat in silence, gazing at the mother and child as waves of worry surged inside him. He knew Tony had passed the critical stage for now, but the road ahead was full of uncertainty. Hospital bills were piling up, and his salary alone could not cover it all. The thought of leaving Hoai Ca to bear everything alone if he had to return to duty made his chest ache. In the silence, Hùng asked himself, should I take a leave from work and stay here with Hoai Ca through this hardship? The thought gnawed at him, weighing heavily on his mind. But reason pulled him back. If he quit, he would lose their only source of income. Then what about hospital bills, medication, daily expenses? How could he provide for them? On one side was the duty of a police officer, on the other, love and attachment he could not abandon. Either choice brought pain. Out in the hospital corridor, a doctor's footsteps echoed briefly, then vanished into the stillness. Hung looked up at the ceiling, his eyes red, haunted by the unanswered question, what can I do to keep my job and still protect them at the same time? That night, Hung barely slept, torn between reason and heart, between duty and love. He knew that whatever choice he made, consequences would follow, and time was running out. At dawn, before sunlight reached the ward, Hung quietly rose, went out to buy hot porridge and some breakfast. He wanted Hoai Ca to eat after days of exhaustion, and for Tony to have something soft to regain strength when he woke. The sight of a man in simple clothes, carrying a steaming bowl of porridge back into the ward, caught the eyes of many, a care so humble, yet filled with deep love. That morning, the doctor came to examine Tony. After careful checks, he announced encouraging progress. The wound was stable, vital signs were good, and if recovery continued smoothly, Tony could be discharged in a few days to rest at home. Hearing those words, Hung couldn't hold back a smile. His eyes lit up as though a heavy weight had been lifted. Hoai Ca burst into tears of relief, clutching her son's hand as if to confirm the miracle had truly come. Yet joy was soon shadowed by financial worries. The cost of treating a head injury was enormous, and special medications only pushed the bills higher. Hung stared at the hospital invoice in silence, brows furrowed, his heart tight with helplessness. Sensing his distress, Hoai Ca gently placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Don't worry too much. I have some savings. Not much, but enough to manage for a while. Please go back to work. Tony and I will find a way." Her words only deepened Hung's guilt. He knew she had been scraping by just to raise Tony, and now she had to dip into her meager savings. As a man, he longed to provide for them, to shield them from hardship, but at this moment, all he could do was bow his head in silence. Not wanting Hoai Ca to bear the burden alone, Hung returned to his small home and brought out the money he had secretly saved for Tony's future. He had intended it to secure a better education or serve as a startup fund when Tony grew up. But in this urgent moment, Hung poured all of it into hospital fees, just enough to get them past the storm. Still, both Hung and Hoai Ca knew the road ahead would not be easy. Tony would need to remain in the hospital longer, and more expenses would come. Their current savings were just a drop in the desert. They had no idea how long it would last. In that moment, Hung gazed at Hoai Ca, who tried to hide her worries behind a smile, and at Tony, sleeping peacefully in his innocent dreams. His heart was warmed by the small family beside him, yet weighed down by the thorns of hardship waiting ahead. Hung's heart was in turmoil, tangled like a ball of thread. He sat quietly in the hospital corridor, eyes gazing into the empty courtyard, his mind spinning with countless worries. The hospital bills kept rising, and his leave of absence was about to end. He had no idea how he could manage to support both Hoai Ca and Tony. In that moment of despair, he suddenly thought of Tiu San, his younger sister. Although Tiu San's life was far from easy, Hung knew she always cared deeply for him and for her nephew. That thought flickered in his mind, giving him the resolve to try. That morning, he asked Hoai Ca to stay with Tony, assuring her he would only be gone for a short while. Seeing the worry in her eyes, he forced a reassuring smile, though his own heart felt unbearably heavy. When Hung arrived at her home and told her about Tony's accident, Tiu San was shocked, her eyes welling with tears of worry. She longed to rush to the hospital to see Tony and Hoai Ca, but with a small child of her own and the long journey ahead, she had no choice but to hold back her sorrow. Hung sat down, explaining Tony's condition, emphasizing that the boy was slowly recovering so she would feel at ease. But when he mentioned the mounting hospital bills, his voice trembled, his hands clasped tightly together, the helplessness written all over his face. For a moment, Tusen fell silent. She knew her brother was strong, rarely one to complain, yet here he was, looking weary and broken. Without hesitation, she went inside, returned with all the savings she had painstakingly gathered from months of market work and harvests, and pressed the money into his hands. Her voice choked as she said, "Take this and use it for your son. I may not have much, but as long as I can still go to the market every day, I can manage. Pay me back when you're able. Right now, Tony is all that matters. Don't burden yourself with anything else." Hearing those words, Hung's eyes turned red. He held his sister's frail hand tightly, overwhelmed, unable to speak. His heart filled with both sorrow and warmth, sorrow that his sister, who was not well off herself, still chose to sacrifice for him, and warmth in knowing that at his lowest moment, family stood by his side, ready to lift him up. On the way back to the hospital, Hung clutched the money in his hand, his heart lighter yet burning with renewed determination. He vowed silently, "For Hoai Ca, for Tony, for the loved ones who sacrifice for me, I must stay strong and keep moving forward." Hung's heart was a tangled mess, like a ball of knotted thread. He sat silently in the hospital corridor, staring out at the empty courtyard lined with cold stone benches. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass windows, falling onto the pale tiles below, but it could not warm the heaviness weighing on his soul. His mind spun with countless thoughts, hospital bills piling up, medicines constantly being added, and only a few days of leave remaining. He knew he could not keep avoiding reality, but neither could he abandon Hoai Ca and Tony at such a critical time. In that moment of despair, the image of his younger sister, Tusen, suddenly surfaced in his mind. He remembered their childhood, when their parents died young, and he had to step up like a father to raise her. Back then, she was a gentle little girl, clinging to him, sometimes giving up her meager share of food so he would have the strength to work. Though her life now was far from comfortable, Hung knew she always held a special place in her heart for him and his small family. That thought flared like a spark, urging him to rise and go to her. That morning, Hung returned to the hospital room and asked Hoai Ca to stay and care for Tony. Her worried eyes seemed to fear he might never return, but Hung forced a reassuring smile. "I'll just be gone for a little while. Don't worry." He gently smoothed her tangled hair, glanced at Tony sleeping soundly, then hurried out. Each step felt as heavy as if he were treading on his own sorrow. When Hung arrived at her house and told her of Tony's accident, Tusen was shocked, her eyes brimming with tears as she whispered over and over, "How could this happen? Tony is still so little." She longed to rush to the hospital, but when she looked at her own young child playing in the corner, her heart ached. The long journey, the lack of help with childcare, she had no choice but to swallow her grief and stay behind. Hung quickly reassured her, telling her that Tony had passed the critical stage and was slowly recovering. He said it calmly, but the helplessness flickered clearly in his eyes. When the topic of hospital bills arose, Hung's voice trembled. His hands clenched together, his shoulders stiffened. Every word cut like salt into his heart, for he was a man of strength, one who had never wished to beg anyone for help. Tusen sat in silence for a long while, eyes glistening, before she slowly rose and went inside. A moment later, She returned with an old cloth pouch containing all the money she had managed to save from long days selling vegetables and working in the market. She pressed it into his hands, her voice choked. "Take this. Use it for your son. I can still manage with my child, living frugally day by day. Pay me back when you can. Right now, Tony is what matters. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." Hung froze. The money was not much, but its weight was heavy with love. His chest tightened as he grasped his sister's frail hand, his eyes red, unable to find words of thanks. In that moment, he was transported back to years ago, when the two of them held hands in the rain, sharing a small loaf of bread to keep hunger at bay. Now, she was still the same, always willing to sacrifice for him, for their family. On the way back to the hospital, Hung clutched the pouch tightly to his chest, as though it carried not only money but also faith, kinship, and strength to keep going. In his mind echoed a vow. For Hoai Ca, for Tony, for my sister, for all those who sacrifice for me. I cannot fall. No matter how hard it gets, I must stand tall. After receiving the money from Tiu San, Hung held his sister's hand tightly, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He promised he would overcome every hardship, then bid her farewell and set off again. But his steps did not take him straight back to the hospital. Walking along the small path shaded by bamboo trees, Hung thought deeply and finally decided to stop by the house of Ha's mother, the woman he had always considered his strongest source of comfort and support. Hung knew clearly, no matter how much he loved Hoai Ca and Tony, he could not abandon his job. It was not only the duty of a police officer, but also the sole means of providing for Tony's long road of treatment and recovery. Hospital bills and medicines might continue for months, even years. If he gave up his work, everything would collapse. That was why, in his moment of inner struggle, he could only turn to Ha's mother, a kind, gentle woman who cared for Hoai Ca and Tony as if they were her own family. Hearing Hung recount everything, Ha's mother's eyes filled with tears. She placed a hand on her chest and cried out in sorrow. "Oh dear, the boy is still so young. Why must heaven make him suffer like this?" Hung stayed silent, letting her release her grief. Then he confessed his own. He could not remain in the hospital any longer. His superior had granted him only 2 more days. If he failed to return on time, not only his job but also his future would be at stake. And yet, the thought of leaving Hoai Ca and Tony alone in the hospital tore him apart. Hearing this, Ha's mother nodded firmly, her gaze unusually steady. She reassured him. "Don't worry, just return to your work. The doctors said Tony's condition is improving very well. In just a few days, he will be ready to leave the hospital. Until then, let me stay by their side. I'll take care of Hoai Ca and Tony. When they are discharged, I'll bring them home to stay for a while until everything's stable. Then we can plan the next steps." Her words were like a fresh breeze soothing Hung's weary heart. Much of the tension and worry that had weighed on him seemed to lift away. He bowed his head in thanks, his voice breaking. "I don't even know what to say. I owe you so much." Ha's mother smiled gently, holding his hand. "There's no debt between us. Family must take care of each other in hard times. You just need to stand firm and do your duty. Leave the rest to me." As Hung left her house, his heart felt lighter. He knew that though many trials still lay ahead, he would not be facing them alone. Beside him were kinship, love, and people willing to share the burden. Looking up at the clear blue sky, he silently vowed, "For Hoai Ca, for Tony, for all those who sacrifice for me, I will keep moving forward, stronger and more determined than ever." When Hung returned to the hospital, the ward was lit only by a soft yellow light. Tony was already asleep, his small face still pale, but his breathing steadier. By the bedside, Hoai Ca sat attentively, gently fanning him with a bamboo fan, afraid the stuffy air would make him uncomfortable. Seeing this, Hùng felt both sorrow and warmth, knowing that all of this woman's strength came from her boundless love for her child. He stepped closer and lightly placed a hand on her shoulder. Startled, she turned to him, then gave a faint smile. After watching Tony a moment longer, they decided to step out into the hallway to talk, so as not to disturb his sleep. The hospital corridor at night was quiet, filled only with the distant footsteps of nurses on duty and the pale glow spilling from nearby rooms. Sitting together on the cold metal bench, Hoai Ca softly asked, her voice tinged with sadness. "Hùng, is it time for you to go back to your unit? I know you should have returned to work yesterday, not stayed until today." Hùng was silent for a few seconds, then sighed, eyes staring into the distance. "I asked my superior for 2 more days. That means today and tomorrow. But the day after, I must return. I'm so worried. I can't bear the thought of leaving you and Tony here alone. I even thought about quitting my job altogether just to stay by your side." At those words, Hoai Ca's eyes widened. She quickly grasped his hand, shaking her head firmly. "No, don't say that. You can't give up your work. I know you've sacrificed so much for Tony and me, but that job is your future and it's the only way to provide for him. If you abandon it now, you'll lose everything and will only become a greater burden to you." Her voice trembled, yet carried rare determination. Looking into his eyes, her gaze glistened with tears, but also shone with strength. "Trust me, I can take care of Tony. He's already much better. The doctor said he may be discharged in just a few days. Go back to your work, and when you get leave, come visit us. I don't want you to lose your future because of us." Hearing her words, Hùng fell silent. In his heart, one side longed to stay, to care for every meal and every night's rest for them. The other side knew he couldn't let his career slip away. Sensing his turmoil, Hoai Ca squeezed his hand gently and whispered, as if to comfort him, "Tony and I will be fine. What I want most is for you to stand firm on your path. Don't let me become your regret." Hùng lowered his head, eyes reddened. He knew she was right. He couldn't selfishly cling to them while abandoning everything else. He gripped her hand tightly, his voice low and hoarse. "I understand. But promise me this. If anything becomes too hard, you must tell me. Don't carry the burden alone." Hoai Ca nodded softly. In the silent corridor, their hands clasped tightly together like an unspoken vow. Though the road ahead would be fraught with hardships, they both knew that as long as faith and love remained, they could endure anything. Sitting in the hospital corridor, after hearing Hoai Ca's gentle words, Hùng nodded softly. He looked deep into her eyes, his voice warm but tinged with hesitation. "I've thought about that too. On my way back today, I stopped by Ho's mother's house. When she heard about Tony's injury, she was very worried, but she reassured me that tomorrow she would come visit. She also promised to drop by the hospital from time to time to help you care for Tony until he's discharged. And when you and Tony return home, she wants to welcome you both to stay with her for a while, so I can focus on my work without worry." Hearing this, Hoai Ca's face brightened. From deep within her heart, she felt a warm comfort. The fear and burden of the past days suddenly eased, for now she knew she would not have to face everything alone. She clasped Hung's hand tightly, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Then you really don't need to worry anymore. With Ho's mother by my side, I'll have someone solid to lean on. You can return to your work with peace of mind. I don't want you distracted or tormented because of us. Do your job well. That's also how you're caring for our future." Hùng was silent, moved by the firmness in her words. His heart felt warmed. He realized she was not fragile as she appeared, but a woman of true strength, willing to endure hardship so he wouldn't have to carry it all. He nodded gently, tightening his grip on her hand. "All right, then after tomorrow I'll return to my unit. But promise me this. Never hide anything from me. If there's any hardship, you must tell me." Hoai Ca smiled, nodding through her tears. In that moment, the two sat quietly together in the hospital corridor, hands clasped tightly. The distant footsteps of nurses on duty, the steady beeping of monitors from the ward, all seemed to blend together, bearing witness to a silent but powerful vow. Hùng let out a long breath, but this time his eyes no longer carried the same weight of tension. He knew that although countless challenges still lay ahead, he could return to his duty with peace of mind, for beside Hoai Ca and Tony was another pair of arms ready to shelter them. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital window, the doctor entered to examine Tony. After a careful check, he smiled and said, "His condition has improved significantly. Just 2 or 3 more days of observation, and if everything continues to go well, he can be discharged and continue treatment with medication at home." Hearing those words, half the weight on Hoai Ca's heart seemed to lift. She gripped her son's hand, tears brimming with joy. Hùng, standing beside her, nodded softly, his lips curving into a faint smile of relief. Just then, Ho's mother arrived, carrying a basket of fruit and homemade gifts. She bustled in with worry written all over her face, yet her eyes radiated care. As soon as she saw Tony, she bent down, stroking his soft hair, her voice trembling. "Be strong, little one. Get well soon. Everyone at home is so worried about you." Her presence eased the tension in the hospital room, replacing it with the warmth of kinship. Hoai Ca was deeply moved, realizing she would no longer have to face everything alone. There was now a firm shoulder to lean on. But that warmth was shadowed by sadness, for today Hùng had to leave. He looked at Hoai Ca with eyes full of longing. Tony was still sleeping soundly, his innocent face unaware that his father was about to go far away. Hùng bent down, kissed his son's forehead, then turned to grasp Hoai Ca's hand, his voice heavy. "I have to return to my unit. Tomorrow my leave ends, and I can't stay longer. I worry, but I believe in your strength. With Ho's mother here, I feel more at ease." Hoai Ca swallowed her sorrow, nodding slightly, her voice trembling yet steady. "Go to your duty. That is your responsibility. Tony and I will wait for you. Do your work well, and when you can, come visit us. Don't worry too much. I can manage." Her encouragement was like medicine for Hung's weary heart. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though pouring all his unfinished love into that embrace. In that moment, neither wanted to let go, but both understood that separation was inevitable. At last, Hùng walked away, his figure slowly fading down the long hospital corridor. Hoai Ca stood watching, her heart swelling with sadness and pride. She knew Hung's departure was not abandonment, but sacrifice for the future, for responsibility, and for their little family. A few days later, Tony was discharged amidst boundless joy. Though still weak, he could smile, speak, and say innocent words that brought tears to Hoai Ca's eyes. Remembering Hung's words, she decided to stay at Ho's mother's home for a while. The kind woman cared for them devotedly, tending to meals and rest, giving mother and child a firm place to rely on. In that warm home, Hoai Ca watched her son sleeping peacefully and whispered to herself, "Even though Hùng is far away, his heart is still here, always beside us." After many long days in the hospital, at last Hoai Ca was able to carry Tony out of those cold white gates. Though still frail, the boy could already smile and softly babble me in her arms. She decided to follow Hung's advice and Mother Ho's counsel, to bring Tony to stay at Mother Ha's house for a while, giving him the best chance to recover. Though modest and tucked away in a small alley, Mother Ha's home was filled with warmth. From the moment Hoai Ca and Tony arrived, she bustled about preparing bedding, tidying a clean room, and adding a small bed for the mother and child. On the dining table, a simple country meal awaited, humble yet brimming with love, bringing tears of gratitude to Hoai Ca's eyes. That night, while Tony slept peacefully in the new room, Hoai Ca sat with Mother Ha on the wooden porch under the moonlight. A gentle breeze carried the fragrance of blooming erica flowers. With a kind smile, Mother Ha said, "From now on, consider this your home. Don't worry about anything. Just focus on making Tony healthy again, and that will make me happy." Hoai Ca looked at her, eyes glistening. Having grown up deprived of motherly love, for the first time she truly felt what it meant to be held in a mother's embrace. Her voice trembled as she replied, "I am so grateful to you. Perhaps heaven has blessed me by letting me meet you, so that I could have another mother in my life." Mother Ha smiled gently, her thin hand resting warmly and firmly over Hoai Ca's. They looked at each other, needing no further words, yet both knew deep within, from this moment on, they had become a family. Two people in love, yet forced to endure separation, a harsh trial that not everyone can overcome. Hoai Ca and Hùng have weathered countless storms, from the anguish of Tony's accident to the painful conflict between duty and love. Yet their sincere affection continues to shine brightly, like a lamp that never goes out in the darkest night. Let us pray together, sending them our best wishes, that everything will turn out well, that all hardships will eventually pass, and that their love will be rewarded with days of peace and complete happiness. A home filled with children's laughter, the protective embrace of a man, and the gentle gaze of a resilient woman. That is the simple yet priceless dream Hùng and Hoai Ca are striving for. What challenges still await them ahead? Will distance remain a barrier, or will it make their love even stronger? Stay tuned for the next video to witness the journey that Hoai Ca, Hùng, and Tony will walk together.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người câu chuyện tình yêu của mẹ đơn thân Ly Hoai Ca. Mọi người thân mến, thì cũng như mọi người đã biết ở trong tập trước thì mẹ đơn thân Ly Hoai Ca đã xảy ra một số chuyện ngoài ý muốn. Còn Hùng thì hiện tại thì anh đang đi làm xa, tuy nhiên nghỉ phép nhưng mà cũng không được bao lâu hết thì phải quay lại làm việc. Và từ khi họ yêu xa thì đã xảy ra rất là nhiều khó khăn. Vậy thì liệu đối với tình yêu của hai người, của Hoài Ca và Hùng, thì cái khoảng cách tận 130 km có thể chia rẽ tình yêu của họ hay không? Và liệu Hùng sẽ làm gì để có thể giữ được tình yêu của mình đối với Hoài Ca, thì mình được mời mọi người đón xem vào tập ngày mai nha. Và kênh của mình thì thường sẽ lên mỗi ngày một video, và mình sẽ cố gắng lên ở khung giờ cố định để mọi người có thể theo dõi. Mong là mọi người sẽ ủng hộ cho kênh mình nhiều hơn. Cảm ơn tất cả mọi người.